October 7th, 1918. Deep in the primal, fog-shrouded nightmare of the Argonne Forest, France, a patrol of exhausted American infantrymen from the 77th Liberty Division, advancing cautiously, suddenly stops. The air, thick with the smell of cordite, rain, and death, carries a new sound. Not the familiar, terrifying chatter of a German Maxim gun or the crump of a mortar, but a weak, hoarse cry. Pushing through the shattered trees and ankle-deep mud, they breach a final German trench line and find them. 194 men, or perhaps the ghost of men. They are caked in mud, their uniforms reduced to bloody, shredded rags. Their eyes are hollow, sunk deep into skeletal faces, staring with a vacant terror that will never leave them. Their weapons are fouled, their throats raw from a thirst that has lasted for 5 agonizing days. These are the survivors of what the world would come to call the Lost Battalion. For 5 days, these 554 Americans, cut off from the entire world, surrounded by elite German troops, with no food, no water, no medical supplies, and dwindling ammunition, had been trapped in a muddy ravine. They were pounded by enemy mortars, raked by machine guns, attacked with flamethrowers, and in a final cruel twist, shelled by their own artillery. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of the absolute limit of human endurance. It is the story of 554 men who were ordered to advance at all costs and who, when abandoned and facing certain annihilation, chose to obey. And it is the story of their commander, Major Charles W. Whittlesey, a quiet, bespectacled lawyer from New York who would become a national hero, and a man so haunted by his duty that he could not survive the peace. This is the story of 5 days of hell and the price of unflinching courage. To understand the ordeal of the Lost Battalion, you must first understand the monumental, brutal gamble of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. By late September 1918, the tide of the Great War had turned. The German spring offensives had failed, and the Allies, bolstered by the fresh, eager manpower of the American Expeditionary Forces, had launched the 100 Days Offensive. This was the final push. General John Blackjack Pershing, commander of the AEF, was determined to prove that his Americans could win the war. He staked his reputation and the lives of over 1 million of his men on a single objective: to shatter the Hindenburg Line. This was not a trench. It was a 4-year-old, miles-deep fortress of concrete bunkers, interlocking machine gun nests, and endless barbed wire, guarding the vital Sedan-Mézières Railway, the main supply artery for the entire German army in France. If Pershing could cut this line, the war would end. The tip of Pershing's spear was aimed at the Argonne Forest, and the 77th Liberty Division was thrown into its darkest heart. The 77th was a division unlike any other. They were draftees, the Metropolitan Division, pulled from the teeming streets of New York City. They were Irish, Italian, Jewish, Polish, and Chinese immigrants. They were gangsters from the Bowery, stockbrokers from Wall Street, and tailors from the Lower East Side. Many barely spoke English. They were the melting pot, forged into a weapon, and shipped to a landscape that was the stuff of nightmares. The Argonne was a prehistoric tangle of dense woods, steep, rocky ravines, and thick underbrush. A place where a man could get lost 10 feet from his own platoon. The Germans called this sector the Kriemhildestellung, and they had turned this natural fortress into an industrial killing field. In command of the 77th 154th Brigade's advance was Major Charles Whittlesey. Whittlesey was the antithesis of the battlefield commander. He was a 34-year-old, rail-thin, bookish corporate lawyer. He was a socialist, a man who had dedicated his pre-war life to progressive causes. He was meticulous, shy, and known to be deeply concerned for his men. He was a citizen soldier in the truest sense, a man who saw his duty not as a path to glory, but as a terrible, necessary job. On the morning of October 2nd, 1918, Whittlesey received his orders. They were simple, brutal, and characteristic of the High Command's disconnect from the front line. Advance up the Charlevoix Mill ravine and seize the hill beyond, Hill 198. The French 161st Division was supposed to advance on his left flank. Other American units, including the 307th Infantry, were to advance on his right. The order was clear. Advance at all costs, do not stop, do not retreat. The problem began with a thick, wet fog. At first, it was a blessing, cloaking the Americans as they moved forward on the morning of October 2nd. Whittlesey's force, a composite battalion of 6 companies from the 308th and 307th Infantry, and 1 from the 306th Machine Gun Battalion, 554 men in total, did exactly as they were told. They pushed. They crashed through the German outposts, cutting wire and overrunning machine gun nests. They advanced over 2 kilometers, a stunning, almost unheard of success in the static hell of trench warfare. They crossed the Charlevoix Brook and dug in on the forward slope of their objective, Hill 198. They had punched a deep, narrow hole in the German line, and then, as the afternoon fog began to lift, the process of their ordeal began. The first sign was the sound. Machine gun fire, which should have been moving forward with them on their flanks, was still raging far behind them, into their sides. The French division on their left had been shattered by uncut wire and withering German fire, and had not advanced at all. The American units on their right had met a similar fate and had been repulsed, falling back. The Germans, masters of defense, did not panic. They simply did what they had done for 4 years. They counterattacked into the gaps. They flowed like water around the American island, severing Whittlesey's battalion from the rest of the Allied army. By nightfall on October 2nd, the trap was sprung. Whittlesey's 554 men were now occupying a small, exposed, oblong depression on the side of a hill, a pocket perhaps 350 yards long and 100 yards wide. The Germans, now fully aware of the trapped Americans, held the high ground on every side. Whittlesey established his command post in a hole in the side of a bank, as one survivor called it. The Germans from the ridges above looked down on them like scientists observing an ant farm. The siege had begun. The German response was immediate and merciless. That first night was a cacophony of probing attacks. Elite German Stoßtruppen, or stormtroopers, crept through the darkness, tossing potato masher grenades into the shallow American foxholes. The Minenwerfer, the terrifying German trench mortars, began their systematic work, lobbing heavy, high explosive shells into the crowded pocket. The thump, whoosh, crump of the mortars became the soundtrack to their hell. The Americans, digging frantically with their small entrenching tools, held their ground, but the cost was instant. The small medical detachment ran out of bandages on the first night. The wounded were dragged to the center of the pocket, near Whittlesey's command post, where their moans and screams became a constant, agonizing chorus. There was no way to evacuate them. By the morning of October 3rd, the true agonizing solution to their problem became clear. It was not a brilliant tactic. It was not a daring breakout. The solution was simply endurance. The situation was stark. Rations were almost gone. Men were limited to a single biscuit, then half a biscuit, then nothing. But the greatest torment was water. The Charlevoix Brook, the same stream they had crossed in their advance, gurgled tantalizingly at the bottom of the ravine, just dozens of yards away. But it was completely exposed, covered by German snipers who waited patiently. To even try to get water was suicide. Men licked the wet leaves in the morning fog for a single drop of moisture. Their throats swelled, their lips cracked, and their tongues blackened. The smell of the unburied dead, both American and German, began to thicken in the damp air. Through this, Major Whittlesey, the quiet lawyer, became a legend. He refused to stay in his dugout. He spent his days and nights in his wire-rimmed glasses and tin helmet, his long stooped frame moving slowly from foxhole to foxhole. He ignored the sniper bullets that zipped past him, checking on his men, offering a quiet word. "Hold your fire until you see them," he'd say. "They can't get us if we stick together." His absolute calm, his refusal to show fear, was the iron spine that held the battalion together. His second in command, Captain George McMurtry, a giant of a man, a former Rough Rider who had fought with Teddy Roosevelt, was the battalion's heart. A Wall Street broker in civilian life, McMurtry was the brawler to Whittlesey's brain. And he too, though badly wounded, moved among the men, radiating a defiant, furious energy. But courage alone could not stop the inevitable. Whittlesey began to dispatch runners back through the German lines trying to reach headquarters. One by one, they were hunted down. None returned. His only link to the outside world was a small crate of carrier pigeons. He began sending desperate messages. One read, "Men are suffering from hunger and exposure. Wounded are in serious condition. Cannot support be sent?" The replies, if any, never came. Then, on the afternoon of October 4th, the situation descended from hell into the abyss. The American High Command knew Whittlesey was somewhere in front, but they were tragically misinformed. Believing the Germans were in full retreat, they ordered a massive artillery barrage to soften up the German positions, right on top of the coordinates Whittlesey had sent. Suddenly, the sky screamed. But this was not the thump-crump of German mortars. It was the sharp, terrifying whiz-bang of their own army's 75mm shells. The barrage was devastatingly accurate. It landed directly in the pocket. Trees vaporized. The earth erupted. Men who had survived 3 days of German attacks were now being torn to shreds by their own guns. It was the ultimate nightmare of war. Men screamed, "It's our own guns!" and tried to claw themselves into the rocky soil. This is the kind of horror that shatters a unit's will to fight. What do you think is the greater fear in combat? The known enemy in front of you, or the unknown catastrophic mistake of your allies behind you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. In this pandemonium, WWII, horrified, turned to his last resort. He grabbed his last carrier pigeon, a black check-cocked bird named Cher Ami, dear friend. He frantically scribbled a message, his handwriting barely legible. We are along the road parallel 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it. An officer attached the note to the pigeon's leg and tossed it into the air. The bird, blinded by the smoke and concussion, was confused and landed on a nearby shattered tree. WWII's heart stopped. German machine gunners, seeing the bird, opened fire, ripping the branches around it. For a terrible moment, the bird sat there. Then, as if understanding the 200+ lives that depended on it, Cher Ami took flight. It rose, climbing through the hail of bullets. The Germans tracked it. A bullet hit. The bird tumbled, but then miraculously recovered. It flew on. Cher Ami, blinded in one eye, his chest pierced by shrapnel, and his right leg hanging by a single tendon, flew 25 miles back to headquarters in just 25 minutes. The message got through. The friendly barrage stopped. But the damage was done. Over 30 more Americans were dead or wounded, killed by their own side. The test, the true climax of their will, came on October 6th. The Germans, furious at the battalion's stubbornness and now facing renewed American pressure elsewhere, decided to end this. But first, they tried psychology. An American private, captured and blindfolded, was sent stumbling into the American lines. He carried a white flag and a typewritten note addressed to the commanding officer of the American troops in the Charlevoix. It was from the German commander, Hauptmann Prinz. It read, in perfect, chilling English, Sir, the bearer of this present has been taken prisoner by us. We have captured 2 of your soldiers who gave us details about your new situation, surrounded by German forces. We are giving you the present note to avoid your further bloodshed. The suffering of your wounded men can be heard over here. We are appealing to your human sentiments. We therefore ask you, in the name of humanity, to surrender. This was the ultimate temptation. They were starving. The wounded were dying of gangrene. Their position was hopeless. Surrender meant life, food, and medical care. Resistance meant certain, agonizing death. Captain McMurtry reportedly roared, "They can go to hell." But WWII, the meticulous lawyer, was more composed. He gave no written reply. His answer was action. He ordered his men to take the white cloth panels which were used to signal friendly aircraft and spread them on the ground. He wanted the Germans to see them, to know they were not surrendering, but were still marking their position for their allies. He then turned to his men and said simply, "Get ready." This single act of defiance is one of the most powerful in military history. Faced with certain death, with his men being eaten alive, he refused. What would you have done? In that moment, would you have chosen to surrender to save the wounded, or chosen to fight on for duty? It's a question with no easy answer. Let us know your thoughts. The Germans, enraged by the silent, defiant rejection, unleashed their final, terrible assault. This was not just an infantry charge. They brought in Flammenwerfer, flamethrowers. Elite German stormtroopers moved in, spewing long jets of liquid fire that turned the damp, muddy ravine into an inferno. Men were roasted alive in their foxholes. The stormtroopers followed, throwing bundles of grenades. It was a medieval vision of hell. But the skeletal, starving, half-dead Americans rose from their holes. They were out of grenades. They were down to their last few bullets. It was bayonet against flamethrower. They fixed bayonets on their jammed rifles and charged, screaming like banshees. They met the German shock troops in brutal, primitive, hand-to-hand combat. And they held. They threw the Germans back one last time. The final greatest test had been met. The impact of this final suicidal stand was decisive. The Germans, stunned by the ferocity of men who should have been dead, and now facing a massive, renewed American offensive along the entire front, finally began to break. On October 7th, the men of the 307 Infantry, who had been fighting desperately to reach their comrades, finally punched through the last German line. What they found, as one rescuer put it, was a living hell. The ravine was a field of corpses, American and German, rotting in the mud, and among them 194 phantom-like figures rose up. When the first rescuers reached Whittlesey's dugout, the lawyer commander, covered in filth, his uniform in tatters, simply saluted and said, "I'm glad to see you." The Lost Battalion, as the press, led by journalist Damon Runyon, immediately dubbed them, was destroyed as a fighting unit. But it had not been defeated. Of the 554 men who had entered the pocket 5 days earlier, 107 were confirmed killed in action. 63 were missing, most likely vaporized by artillery or captured. 190 men were wounded. Only 194 men walked out unassisted. Their stand, however, had been a tactical and strategic success. For 5 crucial days, they had held their objective, tying down massive numbers of elite German troops and creating a diversion that allowed the main American offensive to finally break the Hindenburg Line. The legacy was instant. The 77th Liberty Division's insignia, the Statue of Liberty, became a global symbol of American defiance. The story electrified the nation. Major Charles Whittlesey, Captain George McMurtry, and Captain Nelson Holderman were all awarded the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for valor. They were paraded through New York City as conquering heroes. Whittlesey, the quiet lawyer, was hailed as one of the greatest soldiers of the war. But the story does not end there. The legacy of war is not just about parades. It's about the scars, seen and unseen. Whittlesey returned to his law practice, but he was a changed man. He was, as we would now say, suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder. They called it shell shock then. He was relentlessly hounded by fame, asked to give speeches, to relive the horror, to justify the cost. He was plagued by the faces of the men he lost, the sounds of the wounded he could not save, the crushing, inescapable weight of command. He received letters from mothers asking why their sons had to die in that ravine, and he had no answer that could satisfy them or himself. He was a hero who felt like a failure. In November 1921, just 3 years after the armistice, Charles Whittlesey was asked to serve as an honorary pallbearer at the dedication of the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. He stood in silent tribute to an anonymous soldier while he himself was being crushed by the fame of his very named command. A few weeks later, he booked passage on a ship bound for Havana, Cuba. On the night of November 26, 1921, after spending hours in the ship's smoking lounge, he walked out onto the dark deck and disappeared. He left behind a series of letters to his family and to his friend, Captain McMurtry. His body was never found. The hero of the Lost Battalion, the man who would not surrender to the entire German army, had finally surrendered to the ghost of the Argonne. His death was not a separate tragedy. It was the final, delayed casualty of that muddy ravine. The story of the Lost Battalion is a testament to the breaking point of human endurance and what lies beyond it. It is a raw, brutal, and inspiring look at the true cost of courage. To explore more of these incredible untold stories of valor and sacrifice, make sure you are subscribed to our channel. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive into the battles that defined our history.